So here we are now hearing the description of Lord Brahma's creation, nicely getting into the discussion about the lineage of Swayambhuva Manu. So Lord Brahma created human-like forms. So those forms began with the generation of Manu and his wife Shatarupa, and they were mentioned to be similar to his own form. So Vidura was aware before because he had heard about the appearance of Kapiladev in the line of Swayambhuva Manu as the son of sage Kardama and Devahuti. So Kardama Muni was one of Lord Brahma's direct sons, and Devahuti was one of the daughters of Swayambhuva Manu. So he had heard about that, and therefore he wanted to hear about Kapiladev. So with that in mind, Vidura requests Maitreya Rishi to describe the descendants of Swayambhuva Manu in great detail. And specifically those who were born during the marriage of Kardama Muni and Devahuti. So in this context, Prabhupada is writing in the purport to verse number 1 that regulated sex life to generate good population is worth accepting. So an important word used in this connection is Parama Sammataha, which indicates that the progeny created by Swayambhuva Manu and his sons was approved of by great authorities. In other words, sex life for creating exemplary population is acceptable to all sages and authorities of Vedic scripture. And then the description mentioned about the two great sons of Swayambhuva Manu, who were Priyavrata and Uttanpad. So Priyavrata was the elder son, and Uttanpad was the younger son of Swayambhuva Manu. And apart from that, there were three daughters who were mentioned earlier to be Devahuti, Prasuti, and Akuti. In fact, the whole cantos, the third canto, fourth canto, and fifth canto, they're filled with descriptions of these wonderful and glorious descendants that were coming from Priyavrata and Uttanpad. So the descendants of Akuti and Prasuti will be discussed in the fourth canto, and the descendants of Uttanpad, which include Dhruva Maharaj, Prithu Maharaj, then Prachini Varishat, and the Prachetas, they will come in the fourth canto. And in the fifth canto, Priyavrata and his descendant, which includes Maharaj Rishabdev and his son Bharat Maharaj, they will come in the fifth canto descriptions. So just to kind of keep that in mind. So here in the second purport, Prabhupada is making an interesting comment that Srimad Bhagavatam is also a history of the great rulers of different parts of the universe. So in this verse, the names of Priyavrata and Uttanpad, sons of Swayambhuva, are mentioned. They ruled this earth, which is divided into 7 islands. These 7 islands are still current as 7 continents, essentially. Asia, Europe, Africa, America, Australia, and the North and the South poles. There is no chronological history of all the Indian kings in Srimad Bhagavatam, but the deeds of the most important kings, such as Priyavrata and Uttanpad, and many others like Lord Ramachandra and Maharaj Yudhishthir, are recorded because the activities of such pious kings are worth hearing, and people may benefit by studying their histories. So then Maitreya Rishi goes into the description of how this sage Kardama, who was one of the sons of Lord Brahma, married one of the daughters of Swayambhuva Manu Devahuti. And Prabhupada points out in the third purport that Bhagavad Gita, as far as Bhagavad Gita is concerned, we hear about Vyavasvata Manu, because the whole history of Bhagavad Gita, when it is traced, it is pointed out how Vivaswan gave the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita to Manu, and that Manu is Vyavasvata Manu. And here we are talking about Swayambhuva Manu. And that Swayambhuva Manu is essentially belonging to the Varaha age and the millennium in which Lord has made his appearance as Lord Boar. So that reference had come earlier, so Prabhupada is connecting the dots here one more time. So in the questioning, Vidura asked, how many offspring did that great yogi beget through princess who was endowed with eightfold perfection in yogic principles? And he wants to eagerly hear about them. So in that purport, verse number 4, Prabhupada is pointing out that the husband and wife Kardama and Devahuti were advanced in yoga practice. The husband was a Mahayogi, great mystic, and the wife was a Yoga Lakshana, or one who is advanced in yoga. And therefore, you can imagine what would be the progeny from that. So then, after describing the details of the yoga process that Kardama Muni went through before he entered into the household ashram, we can see that the practice that Kardama Muni went through was the practice of Ashtanga Yoga, but that Ashtanga Yoga is combined with the process of Bhakti Yoga. So he underwent yoga process for 10,000 years just to train himself to reject material pleasure, because he wanted to develop a high quality consciousness that can attract souls of similar consciousness to the womb of the mother once they are conceiving the children. In other words, the sage was extremely careful about the mentality with which they conceived their children. And so naturally, after he underwent through these austerities, completely focused on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he got the audience of the Supreme Lord. So it is pointed out in the verse number 8 that sometimes the impersonalists recommend that one can arbitrarily concentrate one's mind on some form he imagines or which pleases him. But here it is very clearly said the form which the Lord showed to Kardama Muni by his divine grace is described in the Vedic literature as Shabda Brahma. The forms of the Lord are clearly indicated in the Vedic literature. So Kardama Muni did not discover any imaginary form of God as alleged by rascals. He actually saw the eternal, blissful, and transcendental form of the Lord. In other words, what is the byproduct of all this yoga practice? The yoga practice should lead to devotion in the heart, and then ultimately the end of the yoga practice should enable one to meet the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face, and not reaching some hallucinated state where one is thinking that, okay, I'm merging into some absolute Brahman or something like that. And that's what time and again demonstrated by many of these wonderful pastimes. And we find that Kardama Muni, in this case, he went through the austerity on the bank of Saraswati River, which later on Prabhupada clarifies in the 39th verse purport that place where Kardama Muni went through austerity and then got the vision of the Supreme Lord and was able to actually be up close and personal with the Supreme Lord because of the ecstasy that the Lord experienced, because of the austerities that Kardama Muni went through. The Lord became so compassionate that in pleasure he shed tears, and those tears created Bindu Sarovar. So Bindu Sarovar, so that bank of river Saraswati where Kardama Muni performed his austerity, that later on got converted into Bindu Sarovar, and that Bindu Sarovar is worshipped by great sages and learned scholar because Lord's tears are non-different from the Lord. Okay, so then in verses 9 through 11, there is a description, beautiful description of the transcendental features of the Supreme Lord who appeared, having been pleased with Kardama Muni's austerity. So attracted by Kardama Muni's pure devotion, the Lord, clad in effulgent yellow silk, beautifully garlanded with white lotuses, and his pinkish lotus feet placed on Garuda's shoulders, he revealed his eternal form to the sage. And it's interesting that the features, usually when we hear about the four hands, we hear about Shankha, Chakra, and Gada and Padma. Here, what is pointed out is a lily. And this is the first time I'm hearing that Vishnu holding lily instead of lotus flower. So in any case, so here in verse number 11, Prabhupada is writing, the descriptions in the verses 9 through 11 of the Lord in his transcendental eternal form are understood to be descriptions from the authoritative Vedic version. These descriptions are certainly not imagination of Kardama Muni. The decorations of the Lord are beyond material conception, as admitted even by impersonalists like Shankaracharya. Narayana, the Supreme Personality of God, has nothing to do with the material creation. The varieties of the transcendental Lord, his body, his form, his dress, his instruction, his words, are not manufactured by the material energy, but are all confirmed in the Vedic literature. So we should not try to imagine the features of the Lord, but try to follow in the footsteps of these great yogis and great devotees who have already revealed how the Supreme Lord looks like, and they are very consistent in terms of their descriptions. And then finally, in the 12th verse, it is described when Kardama Muni actually realized the personality of God, Supreme Personality of Godhead in person, he was greatly satisfied because his transcendental desire was fulfilled. He fell on the ground with his head bowed to offer obeisances unto the lotus feet of the Lord. His heart, naturally full of love of God, with folded hands, he satisfied the Lord with prayers. So in this particular purport, Prabhupada is going through a description of the Ashtanga yoga process and how when one reaches this whole two kinds of trance, Sampragyata and Asampragyata Samadhi. So in Asampragyata Samadhi, one can realize by his spiritual senses the spiritual form of the Lord. And Prabhupada is pointing out that is the ultimate goal of spiritual realization. The goal of performing yoga is not to just having mystic siddhi and mystic power. That's just a sidekick of yogic process. Ultimately, we are meant to meet the Supreme Lord face to face and develop a deep service attitude at the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. And that's the lesson to be taken. And those who are grihasthas, they should also try to draw a lot of inspiration from this, how Kardama Muni was so fixed upon getting a qualified progeny. And therefore, he went through this severe austerity just so that he can prepare his consciousness before the conception. Thank you very much.